Welcome to the Health and Wealth Power Hour, the podcast that provides you with the knowledge and insights you need to achieve physical, mental, and financial well-being. I'm your host, Harlan Pickett, a business consultant who's passionate about helping people achieve a more balanced and healthier life. Each week, we'll deep dive into topics related to health and wealth, including retirement income planning, innovative healthcare solutions, alternative funded health plans, and specific actions individuals and business owners can take to gain control of their finances, have access to affordable quality health care, and achieve peace of mind. We'll also be joined by innovative experts who will share their knowledge and insights on prevalent topics. So, whether you're looking to grow your wealth or improve your health, you've come to the right place. Get ready to be informed, inspired, and empowered. Let's get started. All righty, gang. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Health and Wealth Power Hour. I am your host, Harlan Pickett. Great to have you with us today. Man, what a timely episode this will be. We are directly after all the craziness of the politics. And as you guys may have noted, if you are longtime listeners or even short-time listeners, it is very rare that we get into politics in the podcast. But I think it's very timely right now because of all the things that are going on in this country and the divisions that we have had. And I think there's a lot of questions right now about government and which direction the government's going to go. And is the government ever going to work for me, or is it always going to be against me and gloom, despair, and agony on me, and all those different things? Well, today we are extremely blessed to have Charles Key with us. Now, Charles Key is a former Oklahoma state representative. He's also the author of a very interesting book that we'll dive into today. But he is really involved in exposing a lot of things that are going on in the government, helping you better understand why it doesn't work the way you and I want it to, but also how we can make a difference in the way it works. He was also very involved in the leadership. I believe he was even the leader of the investigation into the Oklahoma City bombing. Welcome aboard the Health and Wealth Power, Charles Key. It is a blessing to have you with us.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you. It's a privilege of mine.
So let's jump right into this thing. I want to touch on, I think, one of the big things that kind of pushed you, maybe I'm completely wrong here, but kind of pushed you more into thinking things should work differently than they do. And that was your in-depth investigation into the Oklahoma City bombing. One of the things that caught my attention is that there's a lot of things that were never released publicly, and there was a lot of politics behind that. So kind of jump into a lot of the lessons that you learned and maybe even share some of those things.
Well, yeah, that's almost 30 years. We're getting back very close to the 30-year anniversary. And so it was, first of all, the big question I get asked all the time, and in the early days, so to speak, in the first couple of years, actually going for about 5 years after the bombing, I was in the news quite a bit, particularly here in Oklahoma, but even nationally, and did over 600 interviews on radio, even Hannity and all those different guys up there, a lot of them, not all of them. And so, it was the big question people asked me was, what'd you do this for? It's almost like, what's wrong with you? Why would somebody do this? And the real honest answer, and that I've always given, because there is not another answer. I felt compelled to do it. It was like having one of those talks with yourself. And when it happened that I, like others, saw things in the very early days, literally, the day of and the days and a week or so after the bombing, we saw things that didn't make sense, like so many people all over this country saw with their own eyes just watching the coverage. And I felt like, here's another one of those things possibly that are just going to go on down the road, and somebody else is going to tell us what to think and
Right.
believe about it. And I felt compelled to pursue it. And that's the story. That's the beginning of it right there. The problems were that there were a lot of inconsistencies I think to set this up also, it's really good to think about, we just had this election. A lot of the big issues, as it seems like it's always been for as long as most of us can remember, is Middle East problems.
Right.
Problems in the Middle East. Well, if you're a president, nobody really wants to deal with those problems because they never end. They keep going on. It's like trying to get the Hatfields and McCoys to stop fighting. You just can't do it. It seems that way. And so any president or any administration's not really going to want to have to deal with that if they can keep from it. And in this case, a bombing happens. There were Middle Eastern individuals that were seen and identified, and even the local NBC affiliate here in Oklahoma City carried out a very thorough investigation. And that reporter, her name was Jana Davis, she focused primarily on the Middle Eastern connection to it. And she wrote a book about it, and that's her book is about the foreign involvement. But if you were a president and you had foreign involvement like that, you might be tempted to cover that part of it up because the outcry from the American people would be, we want some retaliation.
We want vengeance, right? We want vengeance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone needs to pay.
So when we think about a reason for covering up, that would be one reason right there, and that big one. And I think it was part of the reason to cover this up. But the real reason to go right to the end of a story, so to speak, kind of tell the ending of it, is that this was a fake sting operation that was put together. They began to plan it sometime after Waco because of all the problems that the Justice Department, ATF in particular, had that they were facing because of the fiasco of Ruby Ridge and then Waco, that they put together a fake sting operation to make them look good. They catch these guys in the act, getting ready to blow something up. Well, obviously they weren't successful because it actually did blow up in everybody's faces, figuratively and literally.
Yeah.
And I can say that because we have the government documents that show that and tell that story. So, for example, a field document that reads approximately like this, blah, 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 this agent talked to another agent who, blah, blah, passed on this information and then also informed them that this was a fake, I think is the word they actually used in that document, of a fake sting operation that got out of hand and they were not able to stop.
Huh.
And there's not just one document, there's multiple examples of that we've been able to uncover over time. And so the real telling answer to that is I had a contact with one of our a congressman at the time, who's no longer there and has passed away even. And he, a person that ran one of his offices, had information, told a sibling. The sibling told me, I asked if he would meet with me confidentially. He did. And he's the one that said, well, I had a conversation, because I'm going to tell you this, among other things he told me. I had a conversation with an assistant DOJ and an assistant ATF person, high-ranking individuals. And in the conversation, among other things, they started talking about the bombing. And they said to him, the genesis of the bombing was a fake sting operation that was put together after Waco. And that's how it got started. I asked him when we had that face-to-face interview, I said, well, how did they say it? Is that how they said it? He said, that's exactly how they said it to me. The genesis of the bombing was after Waco, they created a fake sting operation. So when you look at all the facts, it's pretty amazing. That alone is not enough to know about the bombing. When you look at what actually happened, it's pretty amazing. And you look at the facts, the witnesses, the many examples of the prior knowledge, and et cetera, you can see this and wonder why people didn't protest more back at the time it happened.
Yeah. Quite honestly, this is the first time I've even heard of anything like this. And so that's surprising to me because, man, I like a good conspiracy just like the next guy, right? So,
Yeah.
I had always heard it was just domestic terrorism, right? That's what it was. I've never even heard that there were potential ties there. And we're right next door. I mean, I've got family in Oklahoma, and when I say we're right next door, I'm in Texas. So you would think, and Texas loves a good conspiracy theory, right? Let's be honest, Texas loves that kind of stuff. So the fact that I've never really heard of it in this way, that is surprising to me that we haven't. And it also reeks of us not be, not really given the opportunity to hear it either, right?
Well, and I call that part of it, this is kind of what we're talking about right this moment, the psychology of it, because it was a real it was a real education for me in many ways to go through that. I got just beat up to death. They just beat me up, called me a conspiracy theorist and blah, 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 and just whacked me in the newspapers and the television. I mean, it was almost constant for the first 2 or 3 years. And the thing is that you find out that people's minds are closed. They don't want to hear some of this stuff. So the psychology was real important to me. Just the denial, just the people that wanted to trust government. This could not happen. They wouldn't do this. There's some other answer. There's some other answer. It's not a cover up. And so as we looked into this, it was like a fire hose when I decided to come out. So I started looking into it more, and my father had been in television all his life and in various different capacities. So he knew a lot of people. He referred me to someone that actually was in the TV business, that had done a documentary on Waco. He
Okay.
said, maybe we'll talk to them. This man and his adult daughter, who owned a television station, they actually did this because of Waco, really compelled them to want to go expose this. So I talked to them, and one thing led to another. Talked to some of my colleagues in the legislature, and then I decided what I needed to do, and I was going to go out in kind of a formal way publicly. So I had a press conference. I notified the governor, Speaker of the House before I did it, told them what I was thinking and what I was finding out, and had this press conference. And at the press conference, and by the way, there were a lot of citizens that were also a part of this effort. It was a lot like JFK from what I've learned. There were a lot of people that came forward that were just average citizens, as we say, that said, hey, something's not right here. And so they were looking at it. So it started forming a kind of a more formal organization. But I had this press conference on June 30th of 95. The bombing happened April 19th. And so I had this press conference at the state capitol. And the people that attended that was Galen Windsor, a scientist, a physicist, who was part of the Manhattan Project when they created the nuclear bomb. The atomic bomb. He's passed away now. He was at the press conference. A now retired, I'm not sure if he's passed away, Brigadier General Benton K. Parton, called by many experts that I talked to, and we talked to a lot of experts. They said he is the expert's expert. He conducted all of the testing at Eglin Air Force Base and other locations for not just the Air Force, but the military in general, as they, for years, for decades, bombed various structures that they would build to find out what kind of bombs work, what they do, and what they won't do.
Right.
So he knew how this stuff works. He had written his own report immediately after the bombing. And we included it in our 555-page report. He was there. Who else was there? Ted Gunderson. Most of these, if not all of them, have passed away now. Ted Gunderson was a lifelong FBI agent, but he wasn't only an agent, which is impressive enough, and for a career, but he was the head of different agencies like the LA FBI office. He was the head of that office, which was a big deal. I think he was the head of Houston's office for the FBI also. He knew a lot of stuff, and he was aware of the fact that the alleged ammonium nitrate bomb, no matter what size, this is what the experts say, no matter what size it is, it's not big enough to do not only that much damage, but people will remember it wasn't just blowing the face off the windows. There was that cutout inside the building.
Right.
Call it a horseshoe area. All the experts, all of them, private and public, meaning the public guys we're talking about, but even a lot of private people that use explosives for mining and various things like that. They say ammonium nitrate bomb, even if you put some diesel fuel with it, like they claimed later, they said, oh, we found out how they made it extra powerful. They put diesel fuel in it or jet fuel. They all say that's a bunch of baloney. It would not accelerate it because it gets down to this. Anyway, those guys were at my press conference. Another person, Harry, drawing a blank, the inventor of the neutron bomb. I mean, we had heavy hitters there.
Wow. Yeah.
He was going to be there, but he couldn't fly out of LA because the Unabomber, if people remember that name back in that day, was causing havoc, and he had somehow caused the airport to get shut down. So the NBC affiliate in LA interviewed him in a long interview, and they kept playing it for several days. It was great coverage, and did a great job of explaining why I was doing what I was doing and what everybody thought. So, to the point of the ammonium nitrate bomb not being able to do that, this is the way I've talked about this for many years, because for a long time I thought what we call the science of this Oklahoma City bombing subject matter, which includes the building, the bombs, the alleged bombing, et cetera, the damage that was done, analyzing that. I thought it was going to be really hard for us to come up with really good proof that the ammonium nitrate bomb that they claimed did the damage, did not do all the damage. But it actually has turned out just the opposite. It's probably the strongest evidence that there is. Not that there's any weak evidence in that report, frankly. And the reason is, I say you'll relate to this, and many people will. We grew up with firecrackers on 4th of July and all that kind of stuff. If you took a small styrofoam cup that we had, a little coffee cup, uses coffee cups, and let's say you had a black cat firecracker, and that cup is sitting on this table, and you'll place the firecracker right next to it, just laid it there next to it, right up against it, and lit it, and it blew up, it wouldn't blow a hole in that cup. It may push it a little bit out of the way. But now if you take that that black cat and you put a rubber band around it and place it in there like that, or put tape on it and then set it off, it'll blow a hole in that. And that's the way, when you think about demolitions, when they take a building down,
Right.
they don't just go set some bombs in there and set them off. They actually attach them to the columns, and even sometimes drill holes in the columns.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And take it down like that. And that's because the blast wave overpressure diminishes so quickly from the point of the explosion that it doesn't have the ability to do that kind of damage. So, what other examples do we have of that? For example, we put this in our report. Some people might remember a bombing that took place in Saudi Arabia called the Khobar Towers. We had a bunch of Marines there at the time, and some radical Islamists pulled up a tanker truck full of ammonium nitrate with some kind of fuel in it up against that big building, which was kind of contemporary to the bombing, the Oklahoma City bombing building, the Murrah building, about the same size, close to it. And that large truck filled with ammonium nitrate did not do anywhere near the damage done to the Oklahoma City that the Oklahoma City bombing did. And I had one expert tell me, he said, those buildings in foreign countries like that, they're not as well made. For example, the concrete like we have here is going to have rebar, it's going to be high grade and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
He said, you go over to some of those countries, you could take a pencil and just drill it, chisel it into the side there. So he said all that did was blow the face off of it. There's another example in Bogota, Colombia, where same thing, ammonium nitrate pulled up in front of an embassy in Bogota, Colombia. All it did was kind of blow out windows and kind of blow out the face of it. It doesn't do any structural damage. Another one is the Lebanon bombing of the Marines that happened all back in that same time period. Again, could not do the damage. So the big question is how was it done? All the experts say that it had to be done by some additional charges placed inside the building to knock header beam, a primary header beam out, and then several columns that came out.
So if that was the case, and it was still, let's just go down the pathway that we have been told, and it was still a one-man operation, then there would have obviously been additional planning with that person having access and having the time to set all these, and then his ultimate coup de grace, right, is that the very end, now I have the car that I pulled up that sets everything off simultaneously.
Mhm.
That's the only way it works then, right? I mean, if that story is true, that's what would have had to have happened.
Yeah, and so that further is where their case starts breaking down
That's
because
kinda what I'm saying.
yeah, and even from the reason of witnesses, eyewitnesses, as he's pulling that truck up to p in place in front of the building, and there's so much more to this as he drives through the city and this kinda as he pulls that truck up and drives through the city, we've got a whole large list of witnesses that he interacts with people. And so people see a second person in the truck with him, for one thing. So we know he wasn't by himself. I mentioned the reporter that did the Middle Eastern kind of angle on this, and there's a whole bunch of information about eyewitnesses in Oklahoma City that saw him with uh, dark complected people that looked like they were Middle Eastern or Hispanic or something like that. In this book, the first chapter deals with the preliminary hearing. So people might remember that the bombing occurs about later that day. I mean that morning, McVeigh's leaving town going north on I-35, and he gets pulled over because a tag has fallen off his vehicle. Highway patrolman pulls him over. McVeigh doesn't resist. He's even got a weapon, and he tells the highway patrolman, he goes, "I'm just letting you know I got a weapon in the car." Okay, that's fine. So they talked, and the highway patrolman took him in, and that was in Perry, Oklahoma at that time. Well, took them about, I think, 24 hours or so to figure out he was there, and that's the guy they were looking for. So they flew him down to El Reno, Oklahoma, to a federal penitentiary where they conducted the preliminary hearing, which is also called a probable cause hearing, where government has to put its evidence forward to justify holding this person over for investigation and possible trial. So at that hearing, the information the government put out was all based on eyewitness testimony. That's it. They didn't nothing else, which my point here is to make this important point that in the government's own record, they have all these, I think it was 22 in that preliminary hearing, 20 some odd, 24 maybe, witnesses that they used to show that McVeigh was there, pulled the truck up, et cetera, et cetera. The problem for them is that every witness saw him with one or more people, every one of them. And that's the reason they didn't bring witnesses into the federal trial against McVeigh, except for one person. They had to place him at the scene. So they only brought one witness, a lady that was in the Social Security office and was lucky she's alive. The building collapsed on her and on her leg. They had to cut her leg off to get her out. She was actually looking out the window and saw McVeigh pull the truck up. And then she was looking at the passenger side and she saw the John Doe 2 that was in the truck with him get out, walk back out front, and then walk back out of view. That's the one they used. But the point here is that there's a whole lot of witnesses that saw him the day of and the days before, some days or a week or so before in some cases, with other people.
So here's a thought that I have. Do you obviously, the whole story was never told, especially to the public. I mean, whether they're through your books, the books that the journalists wrote, there's obviously more to the story out there. But do you believe that the government, knowing the truth, maybe they didn't announce the truth, but knowing the truth, actually went after the other people that were involved, and we'll just never know what happened to them, or they just let it go?
Uh, well, here's the deal. What we've learned is the other people involved, we know mostly who they are. It's, McVeigh, Terry Nichols, the other guy that they kind of let off because he supposedly knew it was going to happen, but he didn't do anything to just stop it. Um, there, there's other people involved, but the problem is there's undercover agents involved.
Oh, yeah.
In this book, there's an appendix it's 110 pages, I think it is. And in that is the appendix that we have all kinds of documents, some of the ones that I just mentioned about the Bogota, Colombia, and the other places, Cobar Towers. But we also have in there government field documents from the ATF and the FBI that's showing what they were thinking and what they knew. And they knew there were confidential informants in there. So these documents will say, they'll use a code name, a number for the undercover agent, and then they'll redact things, but you can see blah, 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 what's going on. One of the things that really is telling about what we're talking about right now, government documents revealing some of these things. There was a young lady in Tulsa named Carol Howe, very attractive young lady. She was, I guess, 18 or 19 at the time. She started getting kind of wild like teenagers will do and started kind of running with the wrong crowd. She got involved with some of these people they've been referred to as skinheads or things like, other terms like that. Some of the guys were hitting up on her or something, and she was getting pressure. She went and got a victim protection order put on this one guy. And she was meeting with these people in various locations, but there was a place east of Tulsa where they met regularly. And the government had been surveilling those people. So now this young lady, Carol Howe, comes into the picture. She says, I want this VPO. And they were aware of it because they're surveilling those people themselves. They approach her. She didn't commit a crime or anything, like a lot of times this happens. And they said, look, would you go in kind of undercover and report back to us on these guys? And she agreed to do that. They gave her a letter of protection and everything. And then as a few months went by, right after the bombing happened and all the things were taking place, the lawyers, the defense was getting in place, various press conferences were being held, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was a federal grand jury that was looking at the information here in Oklahoma City, preparing for the trials. And we found out through one of those jurors that there was a young lady, this lady I'm referring to, that people are finding out about, that was an undercover. And she knows a lot of stuff, and she's going to get outed because press and others are tracking everything down here, So she got outed, and then the government she had a lot of damning things to talk about. I'm getting ready to talk some more about. But what they did, a couple of years into the Oklahoma City bombing, they got worried. I mean, like a year into the Oklahoma City bombing, they filed charges against her for gathering bombing materials when they directed her to do it as their undercover agent. Typical, we see stuff like this happen. So, I mean, gosh, the last couple of years, we've seen some crazy things like this happen. I went to her trial, and that was one of 3 times when I was involved in this where it really kind of gave me a little bit of fear of God in me that, hey, they're pretty serious about this to try to shut it up, because they almost put her in jail. I'm giving you short versions of some of this stuff. She was fortunate that her family was well off, and she could afford the top attorney or one of the top defense attorneys in Oklahoma, got her off of that. It was a scary situation because she was not guilty of that at all. So, in the course of learning everything that she had brought out, there's like 3 different ATF field documents where her handler, a female ATF agent named Angela Finley Graham, would interface with her, and then she'd write a report about what Carol Howe's telling her. And one of those reports is in our bigger report, and it's one where she has reported back to the ATF and said, look, they have gone, and she had gone with them to surveil various federal locations in Tulsa and in Oklahoma City. So the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, but also 1 or 2 places in Tulsa. And that they're planning to carry out this bombing. A second thing that's in that report is she mentions this one individual who's highly, no doubt, a government agent on some level. He's a West German. His name is Andreas Strassmeyer. And she quotes him in there, that ATF does through Carol Howe's information, that he's saying to these other people at this location that they lived at, saying, look, we need to take our war against the government to a higher level. and start assassinating politicians, create mass public shootings, and blowing up federal buildings, end quote. And that's in the report. They knew all this before the bombing. And gosh, Harlan, there's so much more. There's so much more about the prior knowledge. So, they really did a pretty good cover up on this, and I think Americans were kind of used to it. I think today, if it happened, we wouldn't buy it hook, line, and sinker as much. But there's a lot of evidence showing that they knew exactly what they were doing.
So you were in politics before this, right? You were already in politics well before this particular event happened, and then the the rabbit hole that you went down and found out more and more things. And of course, I'm sure, particularly at that time, everything you found out was even more disturbing than the last thing that you found out. So, give me and the listeners an idea of your feelings about the government, politics, and the government before and after.
Well, that's a great question. I usually talk about that because, usually I'll say in the early part, just to describe myself, I was fortunate. I grew up in a great family, got a great education. Public schools were a lot better back then in the 60s, late 50s, 60s, and early 70s. But I had a great family. And so I had a really good education and had a real interest in our government, the system of government we had, just this great American thing that has been so idolized in a lot of ways. And I felt the same strong feelings about that. The uniqueness of our system. No one's ever done what we've done before, and it's really fantastic. I had a really good, without belaboring that point, a great foundation on the way things are supposed to work in the United States of America, politically speaking. But I also was well read and informed about a lot of things. Also, we went to church every time the doors were open, kind of thing. So I had a real knowledge of biblical history and things related to the Bible, and all this kind of connects. And so I was prepared for something like that. I wasn't on the edge of my seat waiting to see the government, pull off something like this. I'm just saying I had a lot of good foundational knowledge. And then, when this happened, it kind of prepared me for that. But I would say, I hope I'm answering your question. I would say that, you really can't get prepared, which I imagine anybody could buy that. You can't get prepared for being involved in something like this. I've also compared it to probably getting married or having a baby or, going into the military maybe, and, maybe even going into war. You can be told, or going into boot camp. If you go into the military, dad or somebody might tell you, "Hey, here's what it's gonna be, and it's really gonna be tough," or whatever. And then when you get there, you go, "Wow, I heard it was gonna be tough, but it was really tough." So there's things that happen that you learn about. But yeah, I had a good background to kind of prepare me for this, but some things don't really prepare you for this stuff in the depth of it.
And you mentioned earlier that, obviously the view you have on it, and then what's being said out there in the public is obviously cause you to be labeled a conspiracy theorist, regardless of all the data you have. It is funny how, when a conspiracy, I did the quote things, guys, for you who are listening and can't see. Even when that's been proved true and it's no longer a conspiracy, people still call it a conspiracy or call you a conspiracy theorist, which is really humorous to me. But that's, as you said, that's the psychology of it, right?
Yeah, and, I don't know if you've heard this before, but my understanding is this is true, that the CIA actually, quote, "invented" the phrase "conspiracy theorist" as a way to discredit people, and that's how it's used.
Really is. But it's, absolutely is used to discredit you, and it's very misused now, because, and I'm saying it don't even have to be a conspiracy. It can just be you see something a different way. "Oh, you're one of them conspiracy theorists, aren't you?" What?
Yeah.
Because I have a different opinion than you?
Well, it really, I don't wanna step on anybody's toes, but, we all deal with.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. I do, and I'm trying to do it real nicely is what I'm trying to do. But I've come to think this way more than in the past, like 20, 30 years ago, I might have been a lot more critical, but I get it. I've got family members like we all do that they see things differently. Things make you feel everybody feel differently. Everybody doesn't feel the same. So sometimes when people feel threatened, afraid or something, they'll maybe lash back at someone or just put their hands over their ears or something like that, or figuratively speaking. But that's just the way it goes, but people are more aware today, I'm glad, than they have been in a long time.
I agree with you. However, I still think people feel like there's nothing they can do, or else they know they're being lied to, but they just accept it and say that's just the way it is. And I know that's something else that you deal with. So let's kind of jump because, and this is kind of a big jump, and it's also how you got to this point. You wrote a book called Stolen Government, and that book, I think, addresses people's feelings of helplessness. It addresses people's uh, distrust, dislike, whatever you want to call politics, and feelings like, why does it matter who I vote for? It doesn't. They're not going to listen to me anyway. Why I have these representatives, and I don't even know who my representative is. Why would it matter? They're not going to listen to me anyway. They're going to do whatever they want to. Well, you have some valuable insights to that I'd really like to kind of explore here, and a lot of that does revolve around this book too. So let's kind of jump into that side because that was really the starting point that started teaching you lessons about the government that you then have expounded on and are kind of to the point now where you can help people really address those concerns and even give them wonderful advice on how they can be heard in much better way.
When we think about our government, we think about it doing, addressing it or affecting it, et cetera, et cetera. There's, uh, there's kind of two different ways here. There's two parties primarily. There's
Yeah.
us, we the people, and then there's the elected folks that we send up there from time to time. And a lot of 'em, as we know, stay a long time, some don't. But we elect them, and they're supposed to represent us, and not just represent us, they're supposed to protect our God-given rights, or if you don't wanna use God, our inherent rights. Because in this country, we decided a long time ago, uniquely, different than any other government that's ever existed, that human beings have these inherent rights. God made us this way. And other people, if they violate our individual rights, it's kind of a moral issue. You don't do that. And so people forget that, and I understand that, but you still have we the people can correct the government. Now we've seen some things happen recently that some people would say is a real response from the people saying, "No, we want to go this way," or something like that.
Right.
So that's something we could talk, we could use as an example. But there's really two sides of it. And so as I've heard over the years and still get frustrated with people when they go, "Oh, well, they're all the same and they're all crooked," or it doesn't matter or whatever. How untrue I know that is, having been there for 18 years, two different tenures. Once as a minority member, meaning my party was in the minority, and later when I served another time, we were in the majority. So I got to see both of those views too. But the problem is there's been a lot of people we send up there for a long time at various levels, city, county, state, federal, that don't do what they're supposed to do. They don't do what they say they're going to do, and they don't do what they're supposed to do, protect us and look out for us. And so, when that happens, the American people have shown, not just out of maybe ignorance or timidity, you know, not really wanting to get involved, they let it happen. But I think we also show that we're willing to let people work and do the job and give them a chance. And what we've seen is people don't, people in the increasingly get worse and worse, meaning the ones that get elected, worse and worse at doing the job of the people, representing them. As we see more and more spending, we see more and more things that are really working against we the people. So I've become better at being understanding of everybody having to live their life every day, raise their families, make all those decisions and do all those things. And then if you got to go chase down all of your elected officials, which is not just one, it's several, and make things right in that respect, I get it. I get how difficult that is. But on the other hand, it's the only way we fix things. It's really the only way we fix these kind of problems, because it's kind of like the old analogy when the mouse is away, when the cat's away, the mice would play.
Right.
Roughly that analogy. And so left without oversight from the people, elected officials are going to gravitate towards other things, like people that give them money for their campaigns and stuff like that. People that they see every day at the state capitol or at the federal capitol. So it's a difficult thing to do, but the people must be plugged in, and it's real important that they must be informed and educated at least enough to make competent decisions about who the good guys and who the bad guys are.
So what is, you probably experience this to a certain degree. How big a deal is lobbying? Is lobbying really as as big a deal as what many of us believe it is? Many of us believe that lobby is what makes the decisions, not what we personally. We should be the one who has our representative's ear, but instead we feel like in many cases that the lobby is what has their ear because they have the money. How accurate are we just totally off base?
Well, this is the book that you just referred to. It's thin. It's just about 100 pages. It's real easy to read. This came from my experience in the legislature when I was first elected. I just mentioned that I had a lot of knowledge and everything, but one thing I didn't have is knowledge about how the rules work. Those rules and they're like Mason's rules or Robert's Rules of Order. I actually hate that stuff. I don't like it at all, even though I wrote this book about really just one rule. It's really not about all the rules, because that would be boring. And so what happened, I get up there and I have a bill, and this happened so many times in 18 years, and it's so much water under the bridge, I forget the first time this happened. So I have a bill, and they don't put it on the committee agenda that it was assigned to. I go to the chairman, I said, "Hey, I'd like to have my bill heard. Are you going to put it on the agenda?" And they said at that time, and they say frequently, "No, I'm not going to hear your bill." What? Why not? Well, just don't want to. They might give you an excuse like, "Well, we got too many bills and we can't hear them all," or, "Gee, I meant to get it on the agenda. There might be 3 weeks of committee meetings. So if you don't get it on the first, second, you don't get it the third, you're out to the next year." Some excuse. The point being is that the committee chairman, like the Speaker of the House and the Speaker pro tem of the Senate, the committee chairman in 30 of our 50 states, Texas is one, Oklahoma is another, have the power to just deny another member the right to even be heard. They'll let their bill even be heard. People don't know that. I didn't know that.
Wow.
So I got up there, and as a 30, 31, 32-year-old young man, I thought, what? I thought, wait a minute. And my brain started working. I thought, wait a minute. How can you represent your people if somebody cannot let you represent them? How can you have free speech if somebody won't let you express that
Wow.
in the form of a bill and then talk about it and blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, God, this doesn't make sense. So as I started studying it, found out details about it. Well, how do I change it? Go to the staff. They said, well, it's the rules. You could file a bill that would change a rule. It is similar to filing a bill to do anything else. But most people don't even know that. I didn't know it at the time. That's the word. So I started filing a bill that said any duly elected member of the legislature is prohibited from telling another duly elected member that they can't have their bill heard, or stopping that from happening. And so that started the whole process. And that's a longer story we can get into, but that's really what this is all about. People don't realize that you elect somebody to go up there to represent you, and it's like throwing duct tape on their mouth and maybe tying a rope around them. They can't really do it. And it's very, very frustrating. And then the system within the legislature, once you get in there, if you fight against it, I'm giving the real Reader's Digest version here. If you fight against it, you'll be marginalized. And you'll be called extreme right and things like that. If you go along with it, you'll just become part of the deal, and it'll kind of probably corrupt your own thinking,
Right.
which that's the answer to why a lot of people wonder, well, why do I elect these people that go up there and they just change? They don't do what they said they were going to do and they just change. Well, they get up into the system and they get captured by it, or maybe they were that way going in, which a lot of people are. They don't really have the intent to really represent the people. They're looking to feather their own nest.
Yeah.
But you get up there and the system can corrupt good people. And it's really a shame. What ends up happening is special interest groups and large donors, which both of those are donors to individual legislators, are the ones that are really calling the shots up there. And I can give you some stories and we can talk about that, but I'll take a breath and let you pick it up from here.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's really where I was getting at that's really what happening, right? I mean, that's the way you feel like happening is special interest, large donors. I mean, we don't have to drop any names, but especially, me in the healthcare world, we feel like that some of these big companies that have control, whether it's hospitals, insurance companies, what fill in pharmaceutical companies, PBMs, all of these things, that's where the money is, and there's all this change that is always talked about, but all that happens is they just keep talking about it. And that's, obviously, the rich just keep getting richer then, and no no change is forthcoming, as it were. Maybe we'll see something now with a change in administration, coming forward, but maybe we won't. Last time there was an opportunity for this particular administration, and also, in this case, I mean, I'm not afraid to say the Republicans had the House and the Senate and the presidency with this same president, and they made no changes to that. They made no changes when they had an opportunity to put something else in place to make things better. They didn't do anything about that. So once again, I think that's the frustrating part is it seems like almost everything is all talk. And from the outside, it looks like because there's so much money in that, that it just stays the same because that's the only way everyone's going to keep making money.
Well, okay, let's talk about you asked me about the lobbyists and stuff. Right here in Oklahoma City, so there's you go down there during session, there's a ton of lobbyists all over the place. They're just
Yeah.
calling. In our state, I use Texas a lot. I was born in Texas, as I mentioned to you earlier, born in Lubbock. Texas is 6 times larger than Oklahoma in population and a few other ways. And so, you guys don't pay your legislators down there. Up here, they get 42,000. I think it's up to 42,000 a year. So maybe it's 47. When I was there, it was started off at like 15 and went to 20. But the point here is that in Texas, you guys have a lot bigger state, a lot more people, et cetera, et cetera. And every other year you meet to do substantive legislation, and then you make a 2-year budget. And you don't pay your legislators very much. I think they get 7,500. They may have changed this, but I think they get $7,500 a year or a 2-year cycle to run their offices or whatever. Now, look at a state like Oklahoma. I brought this up in talks about reform in Oklahoma. I said, look, we're wasting so much money. We're spending so much time and wasting so much money in the legislature. Look what Texas does. They don't need to meet every year and pay legislators a lot of, significant salary and all these benefits they get, a big retirement deal, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need that. But people don't see that stuff and they don't see how it works behind the scenes. And so, there's a way to, there's no better answer than people paying more attention, and people realize that. I think this year they had to start really looking into some things this election year and find out for themselves what's really going on and get more educated. And that's what I would say anybody listening to this, if you haven't done that, do it. And if you've done it, keep doing it, because it's the only thing that's going to keep us from being bankrupt. Because these things, historically, they run their course, they get out of control because the people aren't controlling it.
Right.
And where you know it, we're all suffering because of it.
Yeah. So one of the things that you're a big advocate for, and a lot of this stuff, almost everything we've talked about falls into the lack of this, and that is lack of government transparency. So talk a little bit about government transparency and more the way that you personally feel it should be designed to actually give us true a true look. I mean, if we knew all these things, right? If we had a very an easier, let me just say, because all of this stuff is there-ish kind of, but you have to dig so hard and go through all the redactions and everything else to ever try to figure out what's going on. But because it's not easy, most people don't do it. And then if you do, then you're a conspiracy theorist.
You know,
Look, what should it look like? Charles, what should it look like to make it easier so people could be better advocates, so people could be better educated, so people could make better decisions on who to represent them?
one of my favorite quotes, I used to be a big quote collector, and Thomas Jefferson had a quote a long time ago that said, "In matters of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down with the chains of the Constitution." And that's what those people that we call the founders knew they needed to do. They had just gone through some really terrible times anyway. So they had that fresh on their memory and their experience. Bind them down with the chains of the Constitution. And our Constitution limits the federal government. It's very specific that it says they can only do the things that are written in that really small Constitution. It's not anybody can read it. It's easy to read. It's short and it's easy to understand. They can only do those things, and they cannot do anything else. The 10th Amendment repeats that. So the Constitution itself is clear about that, and it included some states when they passed the Constitution a long time ago. Some states required that there be this 10th Amendment in there that said the federal. It repeated what I just said, real plainly, and so we have to understand that we have to hold, just like we have to hold our kids, our employees, things like that. We have to hold them to the standards and the rules. We have to make those elected officials go by the rules, and so how do you do that? Well, you have to do it with getting the right people in. You have to know that taking everything and letting practically everything be seen. So when we hear, whether it's at the local level, state, federal, whatever it is, county, when people want to say, "Oh, we've got to keep these things suppressed," because it wouldn't be good for, we're protecting undercover agents in the case of the Oklahoma City bombing or something like that. Don't be so easily convinced of some of the things that we are told by our government, because there's a lot of people in government, and all of them are not good people.
Right.
Many of them are carrying the water for some kind of special interest, whether it's a lobby group or it's more nefarious than that, or maybe just a big money donor that is trying to get something done. There's too many people up there that are trying to do those kind of things, and we have to make things transparent. We're hearing a lot about this from the current president-elect and his administration he's bringing in. We'll see if they get it all done. But we've let it go for so long in this country that a lot of the guys, like I just said, people get elected to a legislative body and they can't really function because the system's been gamed against them. It's even a bigger problem at the federal level. When I wrote this book, we almost got into a broader explanation of other problems in the rules. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about the federal. I did not do either of those two things. I even wanted to get a little bit deeper into the money. Didn't do that. And the reason is because I wanted it to be focused on this one issue, which people need to understand how powerful that is. It's like taking the claws out of a cat, or taking the fangs out. It takes the fangs out of the leadership. They can't play games anymore. So we had a bill earlier this year called the Patient's Bill of Rights that was going through our legislature. Went through the House last year, passed, sitting over in the Senate, went into the Senate committee and passed. And it's a pretty simple bill, Patient's Bill of Rights. It's not really super controversial. But special interests have had their way for so long, they don't like any kind of change. So I'm making a long story short. You had, because of COVID, but also not because of COVID, for other reasons, you had people that had loved ones in a hospital here in Oklahoma that died or got into bad situations, but you had the medical personnel that would not let the families come in and visit or did various things that were real questionable, stuff like that. So you had a large body of constituents and citizens that were behind this patient's Bill of Rights. It had passed in the House. It was over in the Senate. It passed out of the committee. And at that moment, at that kind of cycle of time, there's the state senator that's carrying the bill, and the lobby groups are coming to her and saying, "Hey, we want you to amend this bill before they let it go to the floor of the Senate for the final vote. We want you to amend it, blah, blah, blah." And they start talking to the group of citizens and the author. And the citizens finally, they actually they had the staff draft a bill, and it really gutted the bill. So now it only has the title, Patient's Bill of Rights. We've all seen that happen before.
Yep.
And no substance to it. And the people said, "No, we're not going to agree to that. We're not going to do it." And the senator said, and I'll say it in just a minute. The senator said, I've been talking lately. This is me saying this now. I've been saying this and others have been saying this for a long time. Elected officials are increasingly saying things out loud that they used to keep quiet. So back to the senator, there's this a large group of people, and they're all talking about this. And she goes, "Well, I'm going to tell you right now that the bill's not going to be heard because the hospital association doesn't want it heard." Oh, really? That's like got everybody's attention. And we had some articles we wrote about it, and got it ran in Oklahoma. And of course, the hospital association comes out and says, "Oh, we never do anything like that." So that's the way it works. That's the way it works. When something's controversial or some special interest group doesn't like it, they get preference over what's best for the citizen.
Okay, so you mentioned the president-elect. You mentioned a lot of the things that they're promising, right? I think one of the reasons that he has been an attractive candidate for a number of people is because he's outside the norm, right? He's not. He really doesn't actually fit in as a Democrat or a Republican. I don't think either party actually likes him, but he ended up with the Republicans, and then they had to adopt him because too many people liked what he was saying. But one of the new things that he's talked about, he's already appointed people, is this uh, Office of Government Accountability. And in theory, this sounds amazing, right? It sounds like, okay, here's the transparency you've been talking about. Here's the things we're fixing to look at, in their thought, we're going to look at every single government employee and decide if you're necessary or not. And if you're not, you're out. Uh, Departments are even talking about right now about getting rid of the Department of Education, which has, let's just say, underperformed for a very long time. So with these type things, I mean, there almost any transparency at this point would be an improvement over what we've had. But they're honestly setting the bar pretty damn high for an Office of Accountability. But at the same time, what are your and this is I want to know what your thoughts are on that particular office and if you think it can even work. But I also have a theory on why they can do all these things really fast and really shake this hornet's nest as hard as they want to. He's not going up for reelection. We all know that, right? He's done. So
Right.
in essence, he's got 4 years to do whatever he can do, and he's not afraid to do it. I think it is I want to know your opinion from being a lawmaker, being in office, and I don't know if you had a point where you still knew where you were going and you just kind of went for broke on things too, but just kind of a a mindset that may be different whenever you know that you have a limited time and you really do want to shake things up.
Well, several things make me think of there, but first of all, I did the bombing, and it's not something you do if you're wanting to move up the ladder. And that's inspire. But then, and trust me, I don't know. I think this was worse to
The book, Stolen Government, yeah.
than the Oklahoma City bombing. There's a lot of them. They are ticked off at me for this, but
Sure.
um, where do I go? Um, I believe this administration is going to do what they're saying they're going to do to the extent that they can. I have no doubt about that. But a lot of people know this, they've heard it, maybe don't think about it in these context of what we're talking about regularly. But the biggest problems we have on our budget and our spending is Social Security and Medicare. Those 2 are so huge that we can't cut enough of the rest of it out to fix the budget. I'm not saying that because I think we ought to reduce Social Security. I don't. I don't think we should. Or we could do some things with Medicare to make it better and less expensive, but people are sensitive about that too. I'm just making the point that even though I think they're going to do that and they're going to be empowered to do it, there's going to be a limit to, how much you can really do to make a significant difference that we see. But it'll make a difference. There's no question about that.
One of the things that I was obviously, I hear what you're saying. You wouldn't write the book, you wouldn't have done the bombing, but I would say, is there a different mindset whenever you know that you're not coming back? That you know that you're, in this case, you got 4 years, like you said, they're going to do everything they possibly can do. Do you think that goes into that mindset of we're going to do all these things because I'm there is no reelection, right? I'm not going through this. He's already been through it a few times anyway, but he's not going to have to go through it again.
Well, it definitely, there's no question about it. Everybody thinks about that. Every time I pushed that button, whatever button it was, I was thinking about who's for it and who's against it, you know? And I was part of the minority the first time. And then even when I was in the majority later, I was still part of the minority because of my political philosophy and the things that I've done reflect that. And what I'm saying now is I didn't get the big checks from the organization, the special interest groups and what have you, because they knew I was not for sale. That's the bottom line. That's why it works. And so there's a lot of us up there that we got to fight to raise our own money, and you scrape to get enough just to do a campaign, et cetera, et cetera. And that's okay. That's the way it should be, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But they give money to those that are going to listen to them and do what they want. So back to, we've got to watch how they're playing the game and make sure that we don't let them get too far out of hand where they bankrupt us all, and put some of us in jail.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. So we're just about out of time here. I don't want to keep you any longer than what we said we would talk here, but what are some, I don't want to make it say I really don't want it to be easy. That's not what I'm trying to say here, but what are some very common sense things that people can do to be more engaged? And obviously you need to know who your representatives are. You need to engage with them, at least give them what your opinions are. But I do think, and I want to hear this from you too, I do think that when you do those things, whether it's phone calls, it's letters, it's emails, it's whatever it is, I think it makes a bigger impact than people believe it does, because you are a constituent. You are, you're one call away from, I reached out to my representative 27 times now about this. And so now I'm calling you, local ABC affiliate, and letting you know that he is completely unresponsive to anything that I've tried to do. And that, of course, that's not what that person wants. But I think more people, if we would do those things, a little more call to action, that we could make an impact where a lot of people won't believe that that's the case. Am I on the right track here, or am I off base?
No, you're exactly right. I remember I used to say this in the early days, going back 20 years and more, that the amount I would tell people when I go talk to groups, whether it's my constituents or some other group somewhere, I would talk about this and say, we get very little input.
Yeah.
I would use the number 5. I might get 5 or less input from actual constituents that live in my district, voters. But I might get a pile of cards sent by the union, that they had just printed out, and they get them, which I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying you'll get, the unions, the organizations the teachers, people like that,
Right.
will get their people to do stuff. All we have to do, it's really not hard, but you have to go to the trouble of writing a letter or going down there. I'm going to say in order which are the most impactful things that somebody could do. If they go to their state legislator, their state House member, state Senate member, whoever it might be, city council, you name it. If they'll go see them, that's the most important thing. When they know somebody, Charles Key comes up to my guy and I say, "Hey, live down here on so-and-so street. I voted for you," or whatever the case may be, "and I'm here to talk to you." That gets their attention. And especially if you can talk about, as you're talking to them, say, "Well, people in my area I talk to because I'm part of my neighborhood association," whatever. Communicate with them. You don't have to confront them. But that's the most important way. The second would be a either a typed or handwritten letter, an actual letter that you sign and you mail to them, and it has your name and address on there so they can look you up and go, "Yep, there's a voter in my district." That means a lot because that's what they care about, even as they get up there and start taking a lot of money, getting a lot of their money from the special interest groups and stuff like that. It makes them think back over there, lean over that way. Who's watching? Who's paying attention? And so those are the most important. An email is also important, but if you do an email, make sure you put your full address in there so they know it's from a constituent. But if a person or persons, and if they'll work together to do this, even to organize, to start going up to wherever that may be, whether it's the legislature or local office or something, or writing letters, that is very impactful. And if you've got somebody that's not responding, you need to get rid of them.
Yeah.
If they're a good guy, in my opinion, they need to respond to their constituents.
But I mean, that's what it's all about. They're representing you, right? If they're not representing you in so much as they won't even respond to you, or then yeah, it's time to at the door.
I want to tell people, and maybe because I know we're going to come to a close here in a second, be involved now. There's not a better time than right now to do the things we're talking about. Let me tell you what I saw in Oklahoma real briefly. Just this election cycle, we had a primary, a runoff, and then we just had the general. We changed out. I don't know what the final count number is, but we got rid of a bunch of incumbents like I've never seen in my lifetime, ever. I don't even remember hearing about this many being knocked out. They had even elected the new incoming pro tem of the Senate, the head of the Senate for the next term, the guy coming in 2025. He was pretty liberal, and everybody, grassroots, focused in on him to knock him out. I didn't think they'd be able to do it, but they did. They beat him handily. And probably about a dozen other senators and House members. Some of them are like chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and a lot of people that have been there for a while just booted them out and put in true conservatives. And we're excited here in Oklahoma because of that. And so it can be done. It's not that hard. And there's a way to do it. I'd love to come back if people care to just talk about that, or I could refer you to some people that have actually helped create this, not just in Oklahoma, but in other states, how the grassroots can get organized, come to the table in a way where they can start in a meaningful way, put pressure on their legislature, positive pressure, and not have to spend a lot of time. There's some people here in Oklahoma and elsewhere that came up with a real good model in which they recruit people to come in and they just ask them to do certain things. And that doesn't take, several nights a week or something like that. It's a minimal amount of time to make a difference. And there's a way to do this. People need to do it now while the fire's hot, because there's not a better time that I've ever seen in my lifetime than right now.
No, I agree with you, and I would definitely love to have you back on to talk about that. There's certainly some grassroots things that I kind of mentioned to you that I'm very involved with, and some organizations that we're involved with as well. But you can never know too much, and so grassroots is the way to really build on these things and to build momentum and to bring about real change.
Well, one last thing on this rules issue. I know because I've been in Texas. I actually went down there, and after I was out of office, I wasn't a lobbyist per se, but I came down and talked to legislators about a certain issue and got to know a lot of them and et cetera, et cetera. That's a few years ago. But people it's a lot like Oklahoma. It's just like Oklahoma. It reminds me of Oklahoma and Texas are so similar in many ways, of course. And the legislature is too. And you can make a huge difference in your legislature. People need to get involved so that their legislature doesn't become more out of touch with the constituents. I would also call it liberal, where they start representing others than the constituency more.
Right.
And there's some ways to do that. I'd love to work with people in Texas to learn about how the rules work and prohibit good government and help them find ways to address it in their state.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something people are concerned about all over the country, regardless of what your views are. I mean, I know there's people that have very liberal views that want their, and I get it. You know, I think we all have a right to be heard. That is what our Constitution allows us, right?
Yep.
Freedom of speech isn't just because I agree with you. Freedom of speech is freedom of speech, and I think that is one of the things that I believe personally hurt the Democratic side this time, is because they were out loud talking about limiting things that the Constitution gives you a right to.
Yeah.
It's literally changing the Constitution because I don't like this particular thing in there. And
Yeah.
man, you start messing with the Constitution, you're going to tick some people in America off, and they just found out.
Yeah. And they've been doing it, and they've been doing that for a long time. We mentioned the Department of Education. There's no legal authority for a federal Department of Education.
Right.
There's no legal authority for a Department of Energy. Trump and them, and some of those people that he has coming in, I feel real confident they're gonna get rid of a lot of that stuff as much as they can.
Yeah.
We'll see.
You can see what happens. There's no doubt about it. I think we're either way, I think we're going to be in for a rocky road. Either administration that won. Um, I guess now it depends on your view of whether it's a happy Rocky or a sad Rocky.
Right, exactly. Rocky Road ice cream or just a rocky road, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, Charles, I really do appreciate you spending some time with us. We're definitely going to get back together. I want to get you back on the schedule here in the next few weeks to talk about that grassroots. I think that is can bring some very valuable insights to folks that have all sorts of different things that they may want help with bringing to the attention of their legislatures, whether that's in the state, it's federal, or both, or city, right? County, whatever, wherever you're trying to get some change to happen.
People when they learn more, they will be shocked, and they probably need to be shocked, but they'll be shocked at how much this real left-wing stuff is getting itself implanted at the county and city levels. And it's pretty surprising, really. It's pretty shocking.
Yeah.
But look forward to coming back. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
You're very welcome, Charles. Thank you so much for your time today, and really do appreciate the efforts that you're making to help educate people as well.
Thank you.
And
Appreciate
folks,
it.
don't forget to go out. You can check out Charles over at charleskey.com as well, his website, and find out a lot more information about him. And then, of course, you have his book, Stolen Government. You can go out there. Charles, it is stolengovernment.com, right? That will take you right to the book.
If you go to my site, you can click a link there real easy.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Good deal. All right. Thank you so much again, sir.
Right.
All right, folks, that wraps up this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, if you want to listen to any of our other podcasts, I also have my monthly podcast on LinkedIn called Why Does Healthcare Suck? Be sure and check that out. Appreciate you being with us. Everyone have a super blessed day. We'll catch you next time on Health and Well Power Hour. We are out of here.